So really quick before we get into this video, if you like this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and all of that jazz. It really helps out the channel, and I appreciate it. But we're going to be talking about the Mage item rework today, mainly because I think this is the first step in the whole idea of putting mages in the bottom lane for the mid-season update of Season 8. And if you don't know, that's what Riot's trying to do for the mid-season update for this season. They're trying to open up bot lane to more champions, most likely mages first and foremost, because they're probably going to be the easiest to transition into the bottom lane with the range they already have and the ability to trade and stuff. But down the road more, but this is mainly for mages, so we're going to focus on mages. Part of why I'm mentioning Jinx, though, is because if we are opening up bot lane to other, classes of champion, as like a marksman, you're going to maybe have to deal with other classes of champion down there besides AD carry. So this might be, important to you guys as well as AD carry players, as well as mage players, or even just ARAM players. If you play an ARAM to untilt and you sometimes get a lot of mages in a row or whatever your case is, you're going to kind of want to know about some of these changes. So, first and foremost, there is a change and a form of a new item, which now builds out of Needlessly Large Rod. It actually has the same build path as Loons Echo did, but it only costs 2,800 gold. It's called Spellbound Orb. It gives you 100 ability power and 10% movement speed. It has a unique passive called Spell Steal, which nearby allied and enemy spellcasters charge Spellbound Orb to a cap of up to 200. And an active called Spell Burst, that is, gain up to 50% decaying movement speed and up to 50% ability power for each spellcast stored in Spellbound Orb for an 8-second duration and a 60-second cooldown. It wasn't on the PvE initially because as production and tweaks are still being finished up, no point putting it out there just yet, but if you have a PvE account by now, it might be up and you get to experiment around with that item a little bit. On top of that, Lost Chapter now costs 1,100 gold and has an additional CDR with cooldown reduction to increase the number of failed laning phases. Now, I'll get to this in a second too, but again, if we're putting mages in the bottom lane, this might be a first item you back and buy and might need to be able to sustain in the bottom lane. So, it now gives 25% ability power, it gives you 300 mana, and has a unique passive called Haste, which gives you 10% cooldown reduction, and a unique passive that, the same one as usual, upon leveling up, it restores 20% of your maximum mana over 3 seconds. A lot of the following items that we talk about kind of are exactly the same in terms of actives and stuff. Most likely there's a build path change, and on some of these items there's a little bit of a difference change of how they work, which we'll get into that when we get to those items specifically so you know. But for example, Last Chapter now upgrades into 3 20% cooldown reduction items. A mana item, AP item, and a poke item, which is the Hextech Gop for catch, Ludens for poke, and an Archangel Staff for scaling. So Archangel Staff no longer builds out of Needlessly Large Rod and costs 3,200 gold. It gives you 50 ability power, 650 mana, and now has 10% cooldown reduction. It also has the Haste passive because it now builds out of Lost Chapter, and it still has the Awe and Mana Charge passives as well. Loons Echo, another item that no longer builds out of the Needlessly Large Rod as well, now costs 3,200 gold. It gives you 80 ability power, 500 mana now, and 10% cooldown reduction. It also has the same passive Haste as the other items, as well as its Echo passive as well, which is great for wave clearing and stuff. And then finally, of course, the Hextech Gop 800, which now gives you 80 ability power, 500 mana, and 10% cooldown reduction. Once again, it has the Haste in it because it too, like the other items, builds out of Lost Chapter, and it still has the Frostbolt passive active as well. The GOP has a few mechanical changes. It stops on first unit hit, but its range has been increased to 200. It has a longer slow duration and no cast time. Now, Haunting Guise is one of the items that has kind of been changed flat out, even though the build path isn't different, and we're going to get into that. Haunting Guise no longer has flat penetration, and instead has a passive effect that synergizes with damage over time patterns. This carries over into Liandry's. So Liandry's Torment still gives you 80 ability power, 300 health, but Essence Drain, while damaging champions, increase the damage you dealt by 10%, max 2% per second. And the passive Haunt, spells burn enemies for 3 seconds, dealing passive magic damage equal to 2% of their maximum health per second, and the burn damage is doubled against movement impaired units. So you will still build this item with something like a Rylai's and still do the double burn damage. Brand will probably want this item as well, but if that change doesn't make complete sense, pretty much what it is the more damage you're doing over time to a target, the more damage, maximum health damage you'll do to that over seconds. So right now in live, one of the things with it is it also has the flat penetration, which makes it a really good item for squishy targets. And what they want to do with this change is make it so it's a better target or better buy against targets that are very beefy or tanks. Because honestly, you build this item, especially with Rylai's, probably to deal with tanks, but it's also just really good against squishy, so it's kind of a generalist item. You want it for both, so you'll never not really build it. So they want to make it so it's like, hey, actually it's way better against tanks now than it is against squishies by taking the flat pin off of it. That's the idea there. Morello Nemocon has been renamed to Morello's Cursed Tome, which is now an AP, HP, flat pin, and grievous wounds item that is a mid-tier item, Orb of Shadows, which is pretty much the old Haunting Guise. So speaking of flat pin, this item is now 1500, and it's actually what Haunting Guise used to be, or it kind of is on live right now, and it builds exactly the same as Liandry's does. But Morello's Cursed Tome, which they're now calling it, is now the item that gives you the 15 flat magic penetration, and the magic damage dealt to champions also inflicts grievous wounds on them for 4 seconds. Unlike Morello Nemocon right now, which grievous wounds is only applied if they're below 40% health, this now applies grievous wounds no matter what. You can be at max health, it'll have grievous wounds. It's an item to deal with squishy targets. So if Liandry's is now really only to deal with tanks, you now build Morello Nemocon or Morello's Cursed Tome to deal with more squishier targets and healing targets, even if they have full health. So if you're going bot lane, and you're going to get someone that's rushing either healing, or they have like a Soraka or Sona to heal them up, this is an item you can look as a mage now, because you'll be able to just do the grievous wounds effect to them immediately, even if they're full health. Kind of like taking Executioner's Calling if you're an AD carry, going against like a Soraka or a Stone lane or something like that, or the occasional Draven that like rushes lifesteal. This is that item you would kind of get now. Orb of Shadow now gives 25 ability power and 200 health and has the flat penetration 15 on it. So, going into this post a bit more, the longer post and the problem statement. Mage itemization is very straightforward for most mana mages. You know that you're buying a first item, your second item is usually Liandry's, and your third item is probably Void Staff. So essentially what they also want to do here is make it so your first item might still have to be like a go-to choice depending on the champion you're playing, but even then you can still get Lost Chapter and then branch out into 3 different directions depending on what the kind of champion you're playing does and wants to do. The second item still would probably have to be some sort of mana item now, but at least you're not kind of pigeonholed. They kind of feel like you always, it's like never not good building Liandry's and the Void Staff second and third, and they kind of want to change that by giving people more options. So that's the general idea behind most of these changes. That's most of the items right now. They're also bringing back Twin Shadows. Twin Shadows will give you 80 ability power, 7% move speed, and 10% cooldown reduction. It will also have the Spooky Ghost back on it. So even though Spooky Ghost is no longer on the Frost Queens because they took that away, now they're bringing Twin Shadows back so you can get it that way. For some smaller tweaks, Void Staff is going down from 80% AP to 70% AP. And Void Staff is just kind of generally too efficient against all targets rather than the one stacking MR. Pretty much it's like Last Whisper but for magic damage, except for right now you don't pick Last Whisper against squishy champions and still have a lot of success. But because of how much AP Void Staff has, you do even if you build it and they don't really have a lot of MR, or even if they just have MR boots. Like you have a lot of damage against them because you still just have a lot of high AP. Versus Last Whisper isn't giving you like 80 or 100 damage and then also the armor penetration, so that if they don't have armor at all to penetrate, you're still doing a lot of damage to them because you got 100 damage worth in an item. That's the idea there. They want to make it so it's like, hey, well look, they're not building MR, you shouldn't be doing as much damage with this buy. They want to make it more the anti-MR stacking item. Rylai's is actually going up from 75 AP to 85 AP because when they say when they nerfed Rylai's in a previous patch, it left it in a relatively underpowered state since then. Given how much permaslows tend to invalidate melee champions, they're being careful with this one, but the slow is nowhere near as strong as it was before. And finally, of course, Death Cap. The AP amp is going up from 35% to 40%. In other words, if you don't know what that is, usually you would buy Death Cap and it would give you a bonus of 35% more AP based on how much AP that you've built. So for example, if you've built like, let's say, 300 AP, it'll give you 35% of 300 on top of the AP that it gives you in the item when you buy it, on top of all the AP you built, which is why you usually see people build it last. Well now, the item just isn't living up to its late game fantasy. So now maybe some champions can consider it as a third or even second item, especially when they're going with some heavy AP builds, because now it's going to give you 40% of whatever mana you've already built at this point. So, going forwards, like I said, I think this really has to do with the whole putting Mage's bot lane for the mid-season, as well as they were always kind of looking to kind of do an AP kind of Mage kind of change on the item reworks as well. Again, the reason I brought up Jinx, or maybe just we'll put Jinx in the thumbnail or title, whatever, is because this will probably affect marksman as well, because like I said, this is probably the first big step on putting Mages in the bottom lane for the mid-season, which is, with voice cracks included, coming up in a few months. So as an AD carrier, you're going to have to deal with stuff like this as well, even if you don't play mid lane. Or if you're someone like me, and mid lane is kind of your secondary role, and you play something like Victor, who's kind of been in like a kind of a bad spot, one of the things you look at this and see is, hey, well, Lost Chapter now is kind of on par with the Hextech upgrade. It's no longer like 900 gold, it's at least 1100 gold, so you might be backing at the same time if you want to get that item first on Victor. And there's kind of some indirect buffs to him a little bit with the Rylai's coming back potentially as well, even though he did get some buffs in 8.3 as well. Maybe why they didn't go all out on buffing him a bit more is because this will actually help him and some other champions that have been struggling in the Mage role a bit more as well. I'm not going to say AP Jinx is also going to be good too, but I am a little bit excited. I like doing off-meta weird stuff. I'm just going to say that. I'm not going to promote that, I'm not going to endorse it, but I like doing off-meta stuff with Jinx from time to time. Especially in the rotating game mode queues like Ascension. I'm a little bit excited to see what some of these items on an AP Jinx build would do. Last time I played AP Jinx on Ascension, it really was burning, but I guess I'm also bringing it up to say I can understand the whole pigeonhole effect. Even though I want to go more of an on-hit magic damage Jinx build, honestly with the Flame Chopper scaling and stuff, it was just better to build Leandries and Void Staff. That is an issue that exists, and I kind of understand that. So I do understand these changes, but what are your ideas on these changes? Do you think they're too much? Do you think they're too little? Do you think it's a bit overwhelming? Do you think AP itemization needs to change in general? Or do you think it's a good thing they're changing if they're trying to put mages in the bottom lane? So, that's all for this video. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and all of that jazz once again, but I don't know which video will be next, because life will be quite a mess. So until next time, take care, from the Fire Die FS, and thank you for watching.